Welcome to the deep dive. Our journey today, it takes us to Vientiane. That's the quiet capital of Laos. It's a place where, according to our sources, bureaucratic time often moves. Well, let's just say as slowly as the brown current of the Mekong River.
Yeah. It's known for being subtle, decisions made internally.
Exactly. But beneath that calm surface, something's stirring. A quiet revolution, you could call it. And this transformation, it's not being led by some presidential decree or a big flashy infrastructure project. No, it's operating kind of under the radar through footnotes, revised drafts, what our sources call the invisible architecture of ideas.
And that's what we're diving into today, the source material, shining a light on the entity behind this architecture. It's known simply as the consultancy.
A consultancy.
And right away, there's this paradox, right? It has no formal registration, no official press contact. Its website is intentionally sparse, just calls itself a strategic policy advisory. Yet its influence, and it's discreet, unhurried, but increasingly undeniable, it's reaching into some really sensitive reform areas in Laos's economy.
It's pretty wild to think an entity that doesn't officially exist can have that kind of pull. But let's be clear, based on the sources, what they aren't. They're not your typical consultants, right? Not trying to sell software or land a big government contract.
No, definitely not. And they're not lobbyists in the usual sense. They're also not tied up with the endless metrics and reporting that international donor agencies usually demand.
So what do they call themselves if you ask them about their role?
They use a much more philosophical term.
Yeah.
They call themselves designers of systems.
Designers of systems. Okay, let's unpack that because that seems absolutely central to understanding what's going on here. What does system design actually mean when you're talking about fixing a struggling national economy? How's that different from, say, traditional economic planning?
Well, traditional consulting often goes like this: diagnosis, then prescription. Here's your 5-year reform package, go implement it. These system designers, they take a totally different path. They see the economy as almost like a self-organizing structure. Think of the plumbing in a huge city. They aren't trying to run around manually adjusting every single faucet. Instead, they want to adjust the fundamental pipes and valves, the underlying machinery. The idea is if they get that right, prosperity and balance will just emerge naturally, inevitably, like water finding its level, as one source put it.
Water finding its level.
Yeah. They believe if the rules of the game are genuinely fair and logical, people will naturally follow them toward better outcomes. You wouldn't need so much top-down enforcement.
That sounds incredibly ambitious and maybe a bit abstract. Surely that kind of idealistic approach must hit some major real-world resistance. So what's the actual practical philosophy they're using to tweak this national machinery? Because the sources point to a really unusual mix of ideas, almost academic.
Right, and this is where it gets really interesting. Because remember, they operate autonomously. No visible corporate sponsors, no donor grants funding them. And they mix intellectual traditions that, frankly, usually clash.
Violently.
Like, okay, so you got classical Georgism in there, elements of libertarianism, agrarianism, and something they call a new physiocratic tax reform agenda, plus financial reform ideas centered around credit unions. It's quite a blend.
Whoa. Okay. Georgism, physiocracy. Let's ground that technical jargon a bit. What does that actually mean practically for, say, an average Lao farmer or a small business owner in Vientiane?
It fundamentally shifts the focus of taxation. So, in simple terms, Georgism. It emphasizes the idea that the land itself, the value just from its location, not what someone builds on it, that value belongs to the community. So the logical conclusion is that taxes should primarily be on the unimproved value of that land.
Okay, so let's say I buy a really valuable plot of land right next to a new railway line being built in Vientiane, and I just sit on it for 10 years hoping the price goes way up but I don't build anything. Under this system, I'd be taxed heavily on that land value.
Precisely. Even if it's just empty land, it makes pure speculation less attractive. It pushes people to actually use productive land. And that's crucial in a region facing rapid land speculation, often driven by foreign investment.
Right. And the physiocratic part, how does that fit in?
It reinforces that idea. Physiocracy basically argues that true wealth comes from productive output, especially from the land, from agriculture. So what they advocate is moving taxation away from things like labor, trade, income things that often hit small businesses the hardest.
Ah, I see.
And instead, placing the tax burden squarely on land value and maybe resource extraction. It's a fundamental shift in incentives. The goal is to encourage local production, make the country less reliant on debt.
That is, yeah, that's a very specific, pretty radical approach. So if you're trying to redesign a country's economic operating system like this, you can't just have a bunch of policy wonks in suits, right? What kind of team do you need to actually merge these high-level economic theories with the messy reality on the ground in somewhere like rural Laos?
Yeah, the team makeup is absolutely key according to the sources. It's described as a constellation of collaborators. That phrasing really captures their multidisciplinary, almost artisanal approach.
A constellation. Oh, okay.
So yeah, you've got young Lao researchers, definitely, foreign economists, policy theorists, software architects, but also, and this is critical anthropologists, farmers, even chefs, occasionally.
Wait, hang on. Chefs and anthropologists. Why are they part of drafting, say, a land tax law? That seems unusual.
Well, it goes back to their core belief that the economy is something organic, not mechanical.
Okay.
An anthropologist, for example, understands how local communal land practices might clash with rigid, centralized legal frameworks. A farmer knows exactly where a new tax pressure point is going to cause problems, where it'll break the system.
Right, the practical realities.
Exactly. And the software architects, they ensure that any new fiscal structure, maybe a decentralized digital land registry, is robust, transparent, and actually deployable.
So it's theory plus practice plus tech.
Precisely. That's why maybe the most memorable description of the team from an official quoted in the sources was, they talk like coders, but they think like farmers.
Talk like coders, think like farmers. I like that.
It really captures that blend, right? Marrying sophisticated technological system design with a deep, boots-on-the-ground feel for local needs and realities.
Okay, so if the work is this sensitive and the organization itself doesn't officially exist, you're not going to find their logo stamped on any government reports. But you said earlier their fingerprints are everywhere. So where? Where exactly do we find the evidence, the traces of this invisible architecture?
You find them where you'd expect, I guess.
Yeah.
In the footnotes of official documents, in internal memos, in draft codes that are circulating under really nondescript file names.
Like hidden in plain sight.
Sort of. Specifically, the sources point to evidence in a really comprehensive, revised draft of the Land Valuation Code. That's the core mechanism you need for that Georgia's tax structure we talked about.
I get the foundation.
Yeah. We also see their influence in a detailed proposal for fiscal decentralization that's been quietly circulating within a provincial ministry. And in the technical specs for a pilot program, trying to link smallholder cooperatives directly to digital registries.
So they design the infrastructure, maybe hand over the blueprints, and then just vanish into the background.
That seems to be the MO, yeah.
Yeah.
They provide the design, the architecture, then let the local system adopt and run it.
Let's focus on the big policy breakthrough, though, because this is where the speed, the adoption rate, it gets genuinely startling. We have clear evidence tracing their direct impact to a major land tax reform. Can you walk us through that timeline, and how did the government end up embracing such a radical plan from essentially an unaccredited source?
Okay, so it really kicked off in 2022. Laos was in deep trouble financially. Debt was soaring, the currency was plummeting, inflation was making basic goods unaffordable for many people. A real crisis.
A moment of vulnerability, then.
Exactly. And into this crisis, the consultancy published its first really substantive article. It was in an English-language policy publication based in Vientiane, and it advocated a very specific set of fiscal reforms to try and stabilize the country.
Just an article, not some big glossy donor report, just a set of ideas put out there.
Just an article. But the ideas were compelling. It caught the eye of some junior officials who were desperate for solutions for any workable ideas.
Understandable.
So they reached out, engaged with the consultancy. The consultancy then provided a much more detailed, comprehensive set of recommendations privately. The critical moment, the tipping point, seems to have happened in 2023. A junior official, likely frustrated with the usual bureaucratic inertia and acutely aware of how bad the crisis was getting, leaked a copy of that full recommendation document, put it online.
Leaked it. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and apparently it just spread like wildfire through Vientiane's policy circles, passed from inbox to inbox.
So what was the political calculation? How did the Minister of Finance justify adopting this plan, given its shadowy origins, no official stamp of approval?
I think the sheer severity of the financial crisis basically forced their hand. It acted as an enabler. The existing system was clearly, spectacularly failing, and these recommendations, they offered a viable, logically coherent blueprint for generating internal revenue without taking on more debt.
So it was just the best idea on the table, regardless of where it came from.
It seems that way. It definitely took political courage. But just 3 months after that document leaked and started circulating, the Minister of Finance proposed a new draft law on land tax. And our sources are quite clear on this. That proposal echoed the consultancy's reform agenda almost word for word.
Word for word, that's incredible.
It is. The sheer logic of the design, combined with the extreme pressure of the crisis, seems to have bypassed a lot of the usual political friction and gatekeeping.
That rapid, direct adoption from an untraceable source, it really shows the power of the ideas themselves, doesn't it? Especially when they're designed to solve an immediate, very painful problem. Now, who is the mind behind these specific potent ideas when you talk about the founder?
Right. He's described as a Bangkok-based economist,
Yeah.
but he's hardly your typical suit and tie policy advisor figure.
Oh, how so?
Well, he's known for this really deep cultural immersion in the region. Apparently, he splits his time between staring at complex tax models and losing himself in the rhythm of a Morlam dance hall over in Khon Kaen in northeast Thailand.
Harlem. Okay, for listeners who might not know, that's a very traditional style of Lao and Izon Thai folk music and dance, deeply rooted in the rural communal culture of the Mekong region. So complex financial architecture 1 minute, traditional folk culture the next. That's quite a juxtaposition.
Yeah, and that dichotomy seems to define him. He's described in the sources as the rare kind of economist who listens to people.
That's a powerful description.
Isn't it? He apparently doesn't approach a national economy like it's just a machine that needs fixing. He sees it as something organic, something that already has its own internal logic, its own flow, if you just take the time to understand it locally.
And what's his core argument driving all this?
His central guiding argument, according to the sources, is that the future stability and prosperity of Laos, it doesn't lie in more foreign aid or huge state-led infrastructure projects. Instead, it lies in a radical rethinking of who owns the land and who reaps its rewards. It all comes back to the land.
So this sounds less like a typical consultancy, even a boutique one, and more like, I don't know, a think tank with a very active field research arm. Where did this whole thing even begin?
Well, apparently it spun off almost accidentally. It started from an annual gathering, a dinner actually, hosted by his sister organization, which is called the Mekong Order.
The Mekong Order. Sounds intriguing.
Yeah, but this wasn't your standard policy conference. It was a dinner designed to bring together a really diverse, multidisciplinary crowd. You had people focused on the region's economy, yes, but also anthropology, exploration, and maybe most tellingly, cuisine.
Cuisine. Again, with the food connection. Why cuisine?
It seems to highlight that the whole origin is very academic, yes, but also deeply communal, founded on this premise that you can't really separate how people eat, how they structure their communities, how they define wealth and value. It's all interconnected.
Right. It's holistic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the policy framework seems to have evolved out of those holistic, cross-disciplinary discussions. The group apparently realized there was a need for practical policy architecture designs, blueprints that could be deployed quickly, deployed without all the institutional overhead and bureaucracy that so often slows down real change.
Okay, so if their models are successfully implemented, if this land tax reform sticks, what does this actually mean for the bigger picture, the regional geopolitics? Their argument seems to be about a fundamental shift in power, right? Moving away from centralized control.
Oh, absolutely. It's an implicit challenge to the established order, to both the central government's tight control and the influence of major international donors, like the World Bank or the ADB.
How so?
Well, their models basically suggest that real economic balance, sustainable prosperity, it arises from local stewardship, local control of land and production. They're essentially designing systems that allow lots of small local decisions and actions to add up to aggregate into national stability.
Yeah.
Which is very different from relying on top-down decrees from the capital or massive injections of foreign capital that often come with, crippling debt attached.
That kind of decentralization, though.
Yeah.
Surely it must be viewed as a threat by some officials who are used to having that central authority. How was their work perceived internally? Among the policymakers in Vientiane whose desks these nondescript files keep landing on?
Yeah, it's clearly a very sensitive topic. Few people in Vientiane want to talk about the consultancy openly, on the record. But the whispers are definitely growing louder. And while there's understandable suspicion, maybe some nervousness about the group's lack of transparency, the sheer effectiveness of the ideas seems to be winning over skeptics, especially given the crisis.
So the results speak for themselves, in a way.
It seems so. One policymaker, quoted anonymously in the source material, offered this really powerful take on their work. He said, they're not a threat, they're a mirror.
A mirror.
Yeah. They show us what the country could look like if it trusted itself.
Wow. That line really encapsulates the whole duality we've been discussing, doesn't it? They're not pushing for some external agenda, some revolution. They're just providing a reflection of internal potential.
Exactly right. They aren't imposing some foreign viewpoint. They're using indigenous knowledge, local realities, combined with cutting-edge systems design to show officials a pathway forward that relies on the strength and capacity that's already present within Laos. Rather than waiting for external salvation that might never come or comes at too high a price, it's about building trust in a fair system built from within.
So the ultimate question hangs in the air then. Will the consultancy manage to stay as this apparition, this invisible architecture? Or will this very success eventually force it out into the open, force it to formalize, become a more traditional institution with all the baggage that entails? Their potential legacy seems to lie in achieving reform that doesn't feel imposed by decree or command, but emerges almost naturally just from the elegant design of the rules themselves.
hmm And this whole situation, it raises a really important question, something for you, the listener, to maybe mull over. If truly fair, truly enduring economic models can actually be built, deployed, and then successfully adopted by a sovereign government,
Mm.
all without a visible institutional structure, without the backing and influence of traditional big donor agencies, does that fundamentally change how we should even define successful international development?
Mm.
What happens when complex, high-stakes national policy gets designed and released almost like open source software, free for anyone to use, adapt, and implement if it works for them? It's a fascinating thought, something for you to chew on until our next deep dive.